Welcome to this second virtual hearing of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry into the New South Wales Government's management of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of the land on which the Parliament sits, and pay our collective respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today's hearing is again being conducted as a fully virtual hearing, which enables the work of the committee to continue during the COVID-19 pandemic without compromising the health and safety of members, witnesses and staff. As we break new ground with the technology, I would again ask for everyone's patience through any technical difficulties, which we hopefully will not encounter today. If participants lose their internet connection and are disconnected from the virtual hearing, they are asked to rejoin the hearing by using the same link as provided by the committee secretariat. Today we'll be hearing from government witnesses, including the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, the Minister for Education and Early Childhood Learning, and senior departmental witnesses. Later this afternoon, we'll also hear evidence from the two key teachers' unions. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. While parliamentary privilege applies to what witnesses say in their evidence today, it does not apply to material that is distributed or repeated outside of the hearing. Committee hearings are also not intended to provide a forum to make adverse comment against people, and I'd urge witnesses and committee members to stick to the issues. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that any one of the witnesses cannot answer immediately, in which case they are permitted to take the question on notice, and there'll be 21 days to provide a considered answer and response. Today's proceedings are also being broadcast live from the Parliament's YouTube, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. And whilst we're speaking about the YouTube, I note that the upload ends at some 47 minutes from yesterday's hearing. I can assure you the Parliament are doing everything they can to get a full upload on the YouTube channel as we speak. Finally, a few notes on the virtual hearing etiquette to minimise disruptions and, critically, to assist our Hansard reporters. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to? And could I ask everyone, committee members and witnesses alike, to please state their name when they begin speaking? It may seem repetitive, but it is of great assistance to Hansard. If members could also utilise the raise your hand function when raising points of order, and could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? That includes witnesses and members of the committee. Please remember to turn your microphones back on when you're getting ready to speak. And if you start speaking whilst muted, please recommence your question or your contribution from the beginning once you manage to get it off mute. Members and witnesses should also please avoid speaking over each other and show each other courtesy so we can all be clearly heard. Finally, to assist Hansard, may I remind members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphone where they can and avoid making comments when your head is turned away. I would now like to welcome our first witnesses. Minister, I remind you, you do not need to be sworn because you've already taken an oath of office as a Member of Parliament, and I welcome you to the hearing today. Ms Harrisson and Mr Dizdar, you've already been sworn in at an earlier hearing of this committee, and I just remind you that you're on that former oath and do not need to be sworn in again. So therefore, could I start with Ms Ruth Owen? Ms Owen, could you please state your full name, your position and title, and then take either an oath or an affirmation, and I hope the cards have been provided to you.
Yes, they have. Thank you, Chair. I'm Ruth Owen. I'm the Acting Group Deputy Secretary for School Improvement and Educational Reform in the Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks, Ms Owen. Mr Martin, if you could do the same. Your name, your title, your position, and then take either an oath or an affirmation. Mr Martin, I'm sorry, I think you're still on mute.
My apologies, Chair. Paul Martin, CEO of the New South Wales Education Standards Authority. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you all very much for that. We do have a number of witnesses, so I would really stress to committee members if they could direct their questioning as far as possible. And I might now go to you, Minister. We do only have a short period of time, but if you thought it was a benefit to make a very brief opening address, you're entitled to do that now.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just check with Ms Nixon if she needs to be sworn in? Leanne? Yeah, we've got one of our DepSecs who hadn't done that yet. Chair?
Yep, sorry, I was going off the script there. You were quite right. Ms. Leanne Nixon, Deputy Secretary. Ms. Nixon, are you there?
Thank you. Leanne Nixon, Deputy Secretary, School Performance North, Department of Education. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks very much, Ms. Nixon, and sorry for leaving you hanging there for that moment. So I'll now go back to you, Minister, if you wish to make a brief opening address.
Thanks, Chair. I will, and it will be brief. Can I also just in advance apologise to committee members and also Hansard in the very timely lawn mowing that's happening outside my window at the moment, which is the joys of working from home. And I won't confirm or deny that it's my husband who is doing that. So sorry, everybody, if it's noisy, but hopefully it won't be too bad. So can I just firstly say thanks for the opportunity for us to appear here today. I think it's important that we acknowledge that throughout the pandemic, both this year and last, our school communities, that's our teachers, our principals, our school support staff, and also our early childhood educators, have all been doing an incredible job to adapt to evolving circumstances and keeping our students at the centre. And I think it's important that we all acknowledge that at the beginning of this hearing and thank them all for the work that they do. And also, I think it's important that committee members are aware that, of course, the safety and wellbeing of our students and staff continues to be of the highest importance to me as Minister, to the Department and to the Government. And our purpose as an education system, and particularly for me as Minister, remains to deliver the best possible education outcomes for our students, and that's my job. We know that the best teaching and learning occurs when we're face-to-face, and we know that for a lot of our students, school is a very safe place for them, and at times the safest place in their community, and therefore plays an essential role in terms of our students' wellbeing as well. For our HSC cohort, of course, this is the year, 13 years, that culmination of 13 years of schooling and a period full of preparation, our major works leading up to the exams in October as well. So as the COVID-19 situation has evolved, we've had to adapt, we've had to maintain an appropriate balance between those elements of safety, of teaching and learning, and also access to wellbeing support. I do want to thank and acknowledge the department, many of whom are on the hearing today, Mr. Chair, and our schools for the amazing level of preparation that has gone into this latest outbreak, the ability to adapt to learning from home, the capabilities, the technology, the way that our school communities have responded has been nothing short of amazing, and I think all committee members would agree with that. And of course, responding to the pandemic remains a whole of government effort. I know that you had health officials here yesterday. We've been working really closely with health, with our stakeholders in developing our framework in relation to how our schools are operating on those 4 levels, and also in terms of our return to school, particularly for those majority of students across Greater Sydney from the 16th of August. As committee members would be aware, it's not a full return as we would have known it pre-COVID, but rather an approach to allow that limited essential face-to-face learning to occur for those students who need it most. I also want to say that we've had a good take-up of the priority vaccination programs that health have led in our sector, including for teachers and early childhood educators in hotspots in mid-July, and then of course the current program to vaccinate our Year 12 students in those areas of concern in southwestern Sydney, which is underway this week. So, Mr. Chair, very happy to be here with the Secretary, with our officials and with Mr. Martin to provide clarity and information to the committee and once again reiterate the incredible work that our school communities are doing through this really challenging time.
Oh, thanks very much, Stan. We do appreciate your cooperation with the committee, and you're here to answer questions and to appropriately direct questions to the senior bureaucrats as needed. We appreciate that. And I do want to start by acknowledging, at least on my behalf, and I'm pretty certain on behalf of the whole committee, the extraordinary work of teachers over the last year and a bit. They have adjusted to an extremely challenging time, risen to the challenge as best they can with all of the hurdles that the digital divide provides, and I think credit to all the teaching staff within the department. With that, I will now hand over to the opposition to commence the first round of questions.
Thank you, Chair, and John Graham with a question to the Minister. Firstly, Minister, thanks for those comments, and I'd like to, on behalf of the opposition, join with you in thanking you, your staff, and teachers and school staff right across New South Wales. Minister, the Premier announced her initial plan for return to school for Year 12s on the 28th of July. When were you first informed of that plan?
Thanks, John, for the question. Well, obviously, I've been working very closely with all of my colleagues throughout the pandemic, and particularly over the last period of time this term when we've had that learning from home period. It won't come as a surprise, I'm sure, to anybody on the committee that, of course, I'm advocating for a return to school for our students. I think it's important as Education Minister, that is the case that I put forward. Like I said in my opening remarks, we know that the best teaching and learning happens in the classroom. And we also know, and many of you on this call are parents, understand the challenges of learning from home. It is tricky, and I'm very cognizant of that, having had the personal experience last year and knowing that many of you are also going through that at the moment. So look, I've been in constant contact with my colleagues in relation to the plans for education. That includes the Premier as well, and my other colleagues who sit on Crisis Cabinet in relation to those matters. And I'm very comfortable with the approach. I think what we're doing from the 16th of August strikes that balance in terms of following the health advice, but also returning in a safe and sensible way our students who really need that extra support.
Thank you for that answer, Minister. With respect, you haven't answered the specific question. Education officials have been reportedly blindsided by that announcement. When were you first told of that return to school plan?
Well, I would take a bit of exception to your question that education officials were blindsided by that announcement. We have been working, as I said, with our colleagues in health and other agencies in terms of return to school. I'm certainly very aware of decisions that have been made and that feedback and input in terms of Crisis Cabinet. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of that, and you'll understand why, given that it is a Cabinet subcommittee. But what I can say is that we've been very much involved in that return to school process throughout the entire preparation, and stakeholders were informed before any public announcements to that effect. Ms Harrisson might want to comment further on that as well.
Thank you, Minister. And I think, as you indicated in your question, the Premier indicated her intention for the return to school from the 16th of August for Year 12. And from that time, we have been working in partnership and continue to work in partnership with Health, seeking their advice on the way we can achieve that safely. We have agreed a COVID-safe plan for that return in a limited and managed way for Year 12. It's a Health-endorsed plan, COVID-safe plan for the return of our Year 12 students, so we can provide them with the support the Minister's outlined. So we are working in strong partnership with Health. We will continue to do so. And I think, as many people have commented on through these hearings and in the public domain, we continue to be led by Health advice in the decisions that we're making.
Minister, I might just, I appreciate there's been consultation since that announcement. Prior to the Premier's announcement on the 28th of July, were the teacher unions consulted? Were the secondary school principals consulted? Were the P&C associations consulted prior to the Premier's announcement?
Thanks, John. So obviously, as I think I might have said earlier, we've been working really closely with stakeholders all the way through, particularly this term. I've had several discussions with representatives from the Teachers Federation, the PPA, the SPC, department staff have also been having regular contact with those stakeholders, with the P&C, as has my office. So there's certainly been a lot of consultation and discussion with those stakeholders about a return to school. As I've said, a lot of our focus has been on our Year 12 students, given the importance of where we're at, particularly at this time of the year. And I think that's worth noting. You know, last year when we had our learning.
And Minister, I might just stop you there. It's a very specific question. Did any of that consultation that you're referring to, or Ms Harrisson has referred to, occur before the Premier's announcement?
Look, I'm happy to say we've certainly been continuing to talk to our stakeholders about what return to school will look like. Can I also say in this instance, we've been very much guided by public health advice as well, as you would expect in the middle of a pandemic. I'm aware that the stakeholders were certainly told of the decision prior to the announcement being made public by the Premier, and I know Ms Harrisson was involved in those conversations, so she might want to elaborate a little further.
Thank you, Minister. And yes, we were able to talk to our stakeholders and alert our school communities of the decisions of government ahead of them being announced publicly. And I have been in regular and often daily contact with our stakeholders since the first measures around schooling in relation to this pandemic were announced. And we continue to have discussions with our key stakeholders and across all sectors pretty much daily
Thank
as
you,
these
Ms.
issues.
Harrisson. I might just ask you one, we'll talk to the teacher unions later. When, for example, did you specifically talk to the teacher unions ahead of the Premier's announcement about this return to school?
So I'll need to check the specific dates of the call, but it was either the evening before or the morning of that I was able to give them a call to alert them to the specific announcement that was coming up, that an intention to return to Year 12 was being announced, and that we would work with them in partnership in the plan for that delivery. And that is what we now have. We have a COVID-safe plan for the return of Year 12 in a limited and managed way. We have tested that plan with school principals across all sectors prior to its release. We have taken on board all health comments and advice in relation to that plan, and it's why it's a joint plan for us with health. And so we are really pleased we're able to support our Year 12 students who need that support most to come back in that safe, controlled and managed way. And that's the position we're in as we head towards the 16th of August.
Thank you. Minister, the concern of the sector is that they were taken by surprise. Not my suggestion. Reports of the sector's response. This morning, there are further reports of a departmental memo that back to school planning will be led by consultants from KPMG. The memo reportedly says they will, I quote, take the initial lead on scoping this piece of work. Aren't you repeating that first error with this decision? Why don't you ask some of the thousands of senior educators in New South Wales to lead this work rather than outsource it to KPMG consultants?
Thank you, Chair. I'll offer some initial comments and then get Ms. Harrisson to also provide some further clarity. Can I firstly say, in relation to the premise, John, that the sectors were blindsided, you might be aware that we've had a statement come out from the Catholic, the Independent and the government schools last week saying that everyone is very much on board with the return to school plan on the 16th of August. As Ms. Harrisson said, we've worked through that with the sectors, with the COVID-safe plan that has been co-designed by health and education to do that. So we are all very much on the same page when it comes to that Year 12 return, what it will look like and how we can do that in a safe and sensible way. In relation to the comments and the media reporting today, which I think has been misleading, can I say at the outset that the return to school plan has not been outsourced to KPMG? That is not the case. There is a large amount of work being done within the department in relation to the return to school. Our COVID committee who is doing that work is being headed up by Dr. Paul Wood, who is an executive director in the department. He's a former
Minister, I'll just interrupt to say I accept that, but this memo is reported as saying KPMG will take the initial lead on scoping this piece of work. Is that wrong? Yeah,
so what I'm saying to you, and Ms. Harrisson will be able to provide further comment in terms of the work that KPMG have been engaged to do, but the inference that an external or that the plan to school has been outsourced is not the case, and I'll get Ms. Harrisson to speak about the role of KPMG and how that will work.
Thank you, Minister. And so I'll start with the relation to the KPMG question, but I am very happy to provide some further context to the committee and how we are managing the COVID response across the department. We have seconded 4 members of
Ms. Harrisson, if you could constrain yourself to the KPMG memo, that'd be helpful.
Yep, very happy to start there, but if committee members are interested, also happy to provide further advice. We have seconded 4 staff to set up a programme management office from KPMG. As part of that, they are helping us identify and scope the work streams that need to occur for the safe return of students when and as health tell us that is a safe and appropriate thing to be doing. There is no plan for KPMG to be providing advice to government on the return to school. That is absolutely being led by departmental officials and by our senior educators across the department. I want to thank my educator colleagues in the department who are working above and beyond to support their colleagues in schools with the return, with the Learning from Home hub, where we have online resources available for teachers designed by other teachers to lessen the workload and pressure on the front line. We are making absolute use of our expertise from the teaching workforce in our response to COVID. What we have done is supplement our programme management capacity at a time when across government, you will appreciate, the public service is stretched and pulling in numbers of directions. We have staff supporting contact tracing, as do other agencies, and this is for staff to help support a programme management office and nothing more.
Minister, can I just ask you, when will the KPMG report be due? When's it due to be reported?
Could I just clarify, there won't be a KPMG report. That is not what they have been instructed or employed to do. We have 4 members of KPMG staff on secondment to the department who will be directed and led by department staff, and Dr. Paul Wood is the head of the task force, as the Minister indicated. They are not here to write a report. They are here to provide Programme Management Office support. Okay,
and how long will they be in place for?
We have provision for them to be in place for up to 8 weeks, but we will review that as we go, depending on how far along we get on our journey in the meantime. But we have.
Are you expecting that they will be there until schools return, or are they only until the date that they return is?
I think that's so. Sorry, Ms. Houssos. I think what I'm trying to say here is they have in their contract they are with us for up to 8 weeks. Up to 8 weeks. It has no bearing on the kind of school return. That is not what they are employed to do. They have been seconded to us under the direction of our teams to provide a programme management office at this point in our COVID response planning. That is all.
Okay, Minister, can I come back to you? When will students return to school? I'm going to ask the question that all parents would like to know.
Yeah, thank you, and it's a very good and pertinent question. So obviously, as you know, from the 16th, we're going to have our students across Greater Sydney in Year 12, with the exception of those hotspot LGAs return. It's also important to note that we do have students who are at school across New South Wales now. Many of our regional communities have had schools continue in the normal way, who haven't been impacted by the current outbreak. I think we've made it clear that the learning from home provisions for the other year groups across Greater Sydney will exist until the 28th of August. We are currently working in terms of a return to school plan from beyond that date, talking to stakeholders about what that might look like. We haven't made those decisions yet, Ms. Houssos, and I think as the government and the Premier is saying quite strongly, of course we are looking at what we can do after the 28th of August. We'll continue to do that in consultation with health. As I said in my opening remarks, I'm really cognizant of the fact that learning from home is tough, and despite amazing efforts by our school communities and our families, it is challenging. I'm very aware, particularly for our younger students, our kindergarten, Year 1, Year 2, those formative years are really essential. So I will always advocate for students to be back in the classroom as soon as we can in a safe way. At the moment, we are working through what those return to school plans will look like, but I'm not in a position to hypothesise about dates or when that will be because that work is still underway, as I'm sure you can appreciate.
Yeah, well, the Premier said this morning at her news conference that the lockdown is likely to be going until the end of October. Is that a likely time frame for when our students are going to return to school?
Well, look, the Premier has also said that a return to school continues to be a key priority of the government. And I think the fact that we've got our Year 12 students coming back in a limited way, but still having access to a school site in Greater Sydney that they don't currently have is a good step forward. We will continue to have those conversations with health about what a return would look like. I know Ms Harrisson has already started conversations with key stakeholders again about what that plan could involve, and we're continuing to do that. So I don't want to preempt decisions that are still yet to be made. Obviously, it will be done based in conjunction with health and their advice, as we've done throughout the pandemic. And again, just reiterate that we do have students who are still at school across regional communities. So we are dealing with different levels of impact of COVID right across New South Wales at this point in time.
Yes, but Minister, the parents in particular across Greater Sydney and across the affected LGAs want to get an indication. Are you working towards the rest of this term being from home? Are you working towards the end of the year being from home? What indication can you give them more than just the conversations are happening?
Yeah, well, can I say certainly my understanding of how most of our parents are feeling is that they're pretty keen to have their children back at school as soon as they can. And that's a view that I share. I've been quite open that it's my responsibility and prerogative as Education Minister to do or provide advice in terms of what I think is best for teaching and learning. And clearly that happens in the classroom, but we need to do it in a safe and sensible way. We need to do it in conjunction with health. The Premier has already indicated that this is a priority area of government. I also think looking at more broadly how things go in the general community, those vaccination rates that obviously we need to see increase, and I think there's some really positive signs in that space as well. But what I don't want to do is give misleading information. We are absolutely actively looking at what are our options to return to school, but the timeframes in relation to that will be based on advice and consultations with others across all of government, and in particular health, in terms of what we can do and when.
Yes, but Minister, surely you understand the frustration of parents. Surely you understand that they too are keen to get an idea of how long this is going to go for, and just for them, for the government to be upfront with them. Is it going to be another month? Is it going to be until October? Is it going to be until the end of the year? Surely you can give them more indication than wait until the 28th of August and we're having conversations.
Well, I would just repeat what I said before, in that I'm very aware of how challenging learning from home is for a lot of families, and that obviously as Education Minister, I want kids back in the classroom as soon as we can make that happen. I say that very openly and have had relayed that on many different occasions publicly as well. So we will be in a position to tell parents what to expect, within the coming weeks. We are working on that, of course, with our stakeholders. We know that we're learning from home until the 28th of August. That is still 2.5 weeks away. And like we've done in other instances throughout the pandemic, Ms. Houssos, we've been able to provide updated advice to schools and parent communities in advance of those dates. So we'll continue to work with health, with our stakeholders, to map out what a return to school might look like. And of course, we will be doing so based on the parameters and advice that we get from public health, which again, I think is in line with community and parent sentiment. I think parents want their children to be back at school, but they also want a safe return to school. And they're the things that we need to make sure we work through. That's what we've done for our Year 12 students coming back on the 16th of August. It's the same approach that we will take for a broader return to school.
So, Minister, you've talked about a safe return to schools. Can I ask you then, is there a number of teachers, a proportion of teachers that will need to be vaccinated in order for schools to return?
I'll get Ms. Harrisson to talk about teacher vaccinations, but I'll just say, firstly, we in our public school system, we've got about 51%, I believe is the figure that I've been given, of our teachers who are age 40 and over. So they have been eligible for vaccinations for some time. And of course, with the updated health advice, anyone over the age of 18 can get the AstraZeneca vaccine. We are encouraging all of our teachers to go and get vaccinated with whichever vaccine is available to them. And again, I've made very public comments about that. Teachers that I've been speaking to are keen to get vaccinated. And so in line with the rest of the community, we want our teachers to go and get vaccinated. We're actively encouraging them to do that. I know Ms. Harrisson has been communicating with our workforce about that as well. But in terms of percentages and numbers of teachers that are vaccinated, I'll just get Ms. Harrisson to provide a bit more information.
Before we go to Ms. Harrisson, can I ask you then, what are the criteria for schools returning? Is it a proportion of teachers vaccinated? What are going to be the criteria that you will allow students to return to face-to-face learning?
Well, I think there's a number of elements that we need to consider. First and foremost, it's the public health advice in relation to what a safe return to school looks like. And some of the committee members will no doubt recall when we had to make the decision to move to learning from home, which was not done lightly and not done easily. Part of the concern coming from Dr. Kerry Chant and others is just the huge amount of movement that we have in our school system. We have literally every day across Greater Sydney, hundreds of thousands of students, tens of thousands of teachers. When you talk about the full cohort, add the parents to that as well, as we have during normal times. So it was about minimising the movement in the community, and I think Dr. Chan and the Premier both covered that quite extensively in media conferences in relation to those decisions. I think also if you look at what we've done in terms of our levels, the 4 levels that we've set with our schools for how we manage schools in a COVID safe way when we do have a return to face-to-face learning, that's been available to all our school communities across the state from the beginning of this term. Very clearly sets out some of the extra measures that we'll be putting in place that we haven't had before. Things like mask wearing, minimising extra adults on site, making sure that you stagger drop-off on pickup times for our Year 12 students next week, minimise the mixing between students, for example. So there already is a lot of information and work that has been done in terms of what does a COVID-safe return look like, how do we do that? But obviously we'll continue to be guided by health in terms of a bigger return, what that might look like, how we can make it work for which student groups. Like I said, I'm very cognizant of the early years and those students, but they're all the discussions that are happening as we speak and will continue to happen over the coming days as we work through what our options are, guided by the health advice.
My time's expired. Can I ask just one final question? You said that you would be looking to prioritise, or you understand the challenges, particularly for early primary school. Are you therefore looking at returning early primary school students as a priority over secondary school students, given the reduced risk of transmission and given the increased educational need?
Look, as I said, I think that when you take into account, obviously it's important for all of our students to be back in the classroom, and it's something that we learned certainly last year when we had our learning from home period and what that return looked like. I guess I'm just speaking, as a parent, but also as minister, the younger children, the 5, 6, 7-year-olds, it's much harder for parents, I think, to be managing working from home and overseeing their work. They don't work as independently, but they're also in those really crucial early years where a lot of the formative skills need to come into effect that will impact or have a contribution to the rest of their time at school. So I don't think it would be a surprise.
We understand that, Minister, but will you be prioritising?
Courtney, we will come back. Your time has expired, and I'm sure we'll cover this later.
Sure.
But Minister, had you finished your answer to that?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I don't think it would be a surprise to anyone that obviously we're very conscious of those groups, but then also we've got, vulnerable children in other year groups. These are all of the things that we're considering as government and as an education system in terms of what we need to do on the return.
Thanks, Minister. Minister, do you accept, especially for HSC students and their, and their families, that predictability and certainty and a lack of unnecessary stress is really important in the HSC year, that should be one of the goals?
Yeah, look, David, I think that the HSC is a challenging time for any student. I think particularly this year's cohort, given that they had disruption in their Year 11 studies last year as well. I'm very conscious of the wellbeing needs of this year's class of 2021, absolutely.
Well, Minister, look, I join your concerns there. And it's why I suppose there's been a lot of criticism. I've had many parents and teachers contact me, are very concerned about the somewhat chaotic announcement that the Premier made about the urgent return of HSC students in Greater Sydney on the 16th of August. Were you part of the decision making to prioritise that return of HSC students in Greater Sydney on the 16th of August? Did that come out of your office?
Well, as I said in response to questions from Mr. Graham, I've been very much involved in whole of government decisions around things that relate to education, and I've absolutely been pushing for our HSC students to return, particularly given the importance of this year, but also the time that we're at in the year. So I've absolutely been involved in that.
Well, the Premier announced that there would be this priority vaccination program for Year 12 students in the 8 most affected local government areas in order to get those students back on and from the 16th of August. But that position has now been completely contradicted by the New South Wales health guidelines, hasn't it? Completely contradicted.
Well, I will say that decision to vaccinate those Year 12 students is one that I support. It was a decision of government through the crisis cabinet process, again, as members of the committee would be aware. But obviously that rollout is happening this week. We've had good numbers of students turn up in the first couple of days with more time to come for those vaccinations. But we've continued to adapt to the health advice, and I think that's important, certainly the conversations that we've been able to have with health around that return to school, what it would look like. It was always going to be in a way that was different to what we would normally have in non-COVID times. And I think the fact that we've had those level 4 level settings in place mean that our school communities have been aware that we will be returning in a different way to usual. And again, that's in line with community sentiment and public health advice. I think the decisions around those 8 LGAs to get those vaccinations done and then to look at what opportunities there might be for those students is sensible, and it's based on the advice coming from health, which is what we need to follow.
Well, Minister, the Premier was indicating very clearly that students would be returning from the 16th of August across Greater Sydney, including in the 8 local government areas once they've been vaccinated. But do you accept that the written advice now from New South Wales Health is that no students are to be returning from the 16th of August, none at all, in the 8 affected local government areas because of the COVID risk?
Look, as I said earlier, I'm not going to refer or comment on advice that might have been provided through a cabinet committee process. But what I can say is we've got the settings in place in terms of those areas outside those 8 LGAs. Within those 8 LGAs, we are following the guidance from health. And again, the Secretary might want to comment on that. I know she's having very frequent conversations with Dr. Chan and others. And I will say too, Mr. Chair, it's also in line certainly with what our principals and communities expect. I had a roundtable last week with a group of principals from southwestern Sydney talking through the impact on their communities and the way forward. And I think getting the vaccination rollout happening is really important. I'm pleased by the numbers that we're seeing so far this week. That's going to give us an opportunity to look at what more we can do for those 8 LGAs in the future, and that's really important. But Ms. Harrisson, do you want to comment?
I will go to Ms. Harrisson in a sec, but I just want to, in case you're proceeding on a misapprehension, I'll read to you from the New South Wales Health Guidelines that you've distributed to all schools. And it, under the heading attendance, it says all students in identified LGAs, and they are the 8 most affected LGAs, must continue learning from home until advised otherwise. Now, that is directly contrary to what the Premier was suggesting about a return to work once vaccinated. I'm not asking about cabinet privilege material. I'm asking about the material you've distributed to all schools and teachers. It's directly contrary to what the Premier put.
Well, the advice that's gone out to schools, Mr. Chair, and again, I'll ask Ms. Harrisson to comment on that because she obviously oversees those operational elements, is consistent with how we've planned for the return to school. So, Ms. Harrisson?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. It's the Premier announced an intention for the return of Year 12 and also announced some additional safety measures that would make it possible for those students in those 8 LGAs to return to learning at an appropriate time. I think one of the things we've all heard Dr. Chant comment on repeatedly is the fast and evolving nature of this pandemic. And so we continue to take up-to-date advice from Dr. Chant every day. As we settled and finalised the COVID safe plan, it was the health advice, and we have followed the health advice, that at this time it is not appropriate to bring Year 12 students back in those 8 LGAs. We maintain, though, that it is a valuable exercise to continue to get those Year 12 students vaccinated. One of the key public health measures in managing this outbreak of COVID-19 is vaccination, and enabling our Year 12 students in those areas to access a vaccination helps protect them, their families and their communities, and will enable them, when they are fully vaccinated, to have a better chance of a return to learning and to complete their HSC, as they've all been working so hard to do.
Well, Minister and Ms. Harrisson, I don't think anyone would push back against the idea that it's hugely beneficial to get Year 12 students vaccinated. The proposition I'm putting to you is that at nowhere in the current health advice that the department has does it say that once students in those 8 local government areas are vaccinated or reach a level of vaccination, that there'll be a return to school. I mean, that's just not contained in the public health advice, is it?
So I think, as I commented previously, this is an emerging and evolving situation that we are managing, and we continue the conversations with health, and we'll update the health advice as the positions in those LGAs evolves as well. And so I don't want to hypothesize about what may or may not be possible based on health advice in a few days, in a week, in a month's time. What I do want to focus on is that we are really trying to support our Year 12s have the best opportunity to complete their HSC. For those students, that is including access to a vaccination, and we're delighted with the uptake of that opportunity so far. And we're also glad that it is part of the overall public health support in those communities to limit transmission and spread of the virus in South West Sydney.
Yes, but let's be clear. Is there any public health advice you can point to that has been provided to you, Minister, or you, Ms. Harrisson, that supported the Premier's announcement of the return to school?
I'm sorry, Chair, I can't. Have you finished your question? I've frozen on my end.
I've lost the chair.
Courtney, your time to shine.
I don't know, I thought I'd frozen as well. Given that it's crossbench time and we don't actually have any other crossbench members, I might just perhaps encourage David to turn his video off, and then I'll just give him a moment to try and rejoin. No, I think he's going to have some difficulty, so he might have to jump off. All right, we might pause his time there and then come back to Labor questioning. Minister, can I ask you, you told it, oh, David, are you, I think we've got you again, if you want to.
My internet is mucking up. I fear it is multiple access due to working, schooling from home and work from home on the NBN. So I apologise for that. Thank you for stepping in.
We're all juggling that. No, my pleasure. I'll hand back for you to questioning.
Actually, my internet is still a little unstable. So what I might do is I might hand over to you, Courtney, for 5 minutes, and I will log off and log back on again and see if that corrects matters. So thank you for taking over, Courtney.
Excellent, my pleasure. Okay. Minister, can I come back to the question about the vaccinations? Are you able to provide us with a number of number of students who have been vaccinated at Kudos Bank Arena over the last 2 days?
Yeah, I'll ask Ms. Owen to provide the information that we have, but also just note that, as you'd appreciate, the vaccine rollout is being done by health, so any sort of specific questions would be better directed to them. But I know that Ms. Owen has an overview certainly from the last couple of days, so I'm happy for her to provide that.
Thanks, Minister. Ms. Houssos, the number of students vaccinated as at close yesterday was 6,500.
6,500, and what proportion of available appointments was that?
Again, we can probably take that on notice, but it might be a question better directed to health because, like I said, they're controlling all of the vaccine bookings and appointments, not us. I understand you had them here yesterday. If you've got an opportunity to put questions on notice, that health is doing the rollout at Kudos Bank Arena, not education. So we're not in a position to provide that level of detail, is my understanding.
Ms. Owens, is that the case? Ms. Owens, sorry.
Yeah, the booking system is operated by health, so they would be able to give you certainly that detailed information about the proportion of booking slots. I do know for sure Monday was completely booked out, and yesterday was almost fully booked out, and bookings go through for the rest of the week through to the end of Saturday.
Okay, and do you have, Ms. Owen, any indication as to what they're like for the rest of the week? Are we fully booked? Are we close to that?
No, I don't.
Okay. Do you know what percentage of students who are eligible across the 9 LGAs, because I understand Penrith students are now eligible as well, what proportion of students have now booked in?
Well, again, I think in relation to that, we would have to go to health in terms of the numbers, so because they're running the vaccine rollout, not education.
Ms. Owen, did you have any further information?
Again, health will have the most up-to-date information. Students are going through large proportions. This is a high, large-scale operation over 6 days. So health would give you the latest up-to-date information. I know as of last night, over 50% were booked in.
Over 50% were booked in. And well then, Minister, can I ask if you'll commit to releasing the data by LGA of what percentage of HSC students were vaccinated this week once it's completed?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to take that on notice. As I said, we would have to do that in consultation with health, and I'm not sure in terms of sort of private personal information of students as well. But I appreciate the intention that the committee would like to get an understanding of, roughly how many students have been vaccinated and the percentage. So we'll take that on notice and see what we can provide, noting, of course, that we're on day 3 of I think it's a 6-day rollout. So we'll be in a position to provide more information to the committee on notice, and happy to give you what we can.
That would be great.
Thanks for stepping up, Courtney. I hope I'm back.
You are back? We can hear you.
Did you finish that line of questioning, or can you come
I've
back to
just
it?
got.
You
Oh,
go.
yep.
Finish the line. You finish your line of questioning and then indicate when you hand over.
Thanks, David. So, will the vaccinations be available if students are unable to attend Kudos Bank Arena this week?
Yeah, I'll ask Ms. Owen to provide a bit of clarity around the ways that we are supporting schools for students who might have difficulty getting to Kudos Bank Arena. Obviously, we found that for many of our students and families, they preferred to make their own way there. They felt more comfortable doing that. But we do have some students where that has been a concern, and I will acknowledge I've had local members in that community, those communities reach out to me in relation to that as well. So we are working to accommodate students who might not be able to get to Kudos Bank for a range of reasons, and Ms. Owen can talk about that now briefly for you.
Yes, so we are expecting the vast majority of students to make their own way to the Kudos Bank Arena, but there are two cohorts of students for whom separate arrangements are being made. Firstly, as of now, the department has made arrangements for students who can't use their own transport or are not confident using public transport to go to the Kudos Bank Arena via a taxi service. And that was put in place yesterday, and students are using that service arranged via their school. Their principal makes that arrangement for them, and that's funded by the department, just to make sure people who aren't used to using public transport can make avail themselves of that service and maximise the number of students getting the vaccine. The second cohort of students are those students for whom it would be very difficult to access the Kudos Bank Arena, mostly due to different forms of disability. And we're working with Health right now on putting in place more personalised arrangements at a local level for them. So the vaccine will be available for them, but not through the Kudos Bank Arena Mass Vaccination Centre, which I think is appropriate for that cohort.
So, Minister, can I come back to you? Are you looking at schools at their individual percentage rates of vaccination? Will they be prevented from allowing students back on campus if they don't reach a certain percentage?
Look, what we're doing at the moment is encouraging all of our students in those 8 LGAs who are eligible for the vaccine to go and get the vaccine. I think, as the Health Minister said earlier this week, what might have been late last week, it really is a golden opportunity to go and protect yourself, your family and your other student cohorts. So that is what we are focusing on. We want our students to go and get vaccinated. I can't hypothesise on what those final numbers will be because, as I said, we're only a couple of days in. It's encouraging, the numbers so far. But we'll continue to work with Health in terms of what return looks like in those areas. But for now, the messaging to those students, to their families, has to absolutely be, take that opportunity now to go and get vaccinated. It is the best thing for you to do. And we just can't get that out strongly enough to those students and their families that they need to be making their appointments and going this week and getting those jabs in arms. It's just critical.
Yeah, and we certainly welcome the ability to provide those individualised arrangements. I know my colleagues in Campbelltown and Macquarie Fields were really advocating very hard for that, those logistical issues to be addressed. We want to be reducing those barriers to getting those Year 12 students there.
Yeah, and if I can say too, I'd really appreciate the contacts that I've had from local members about that. It's been really useful, and also principals again in that area of southwestern Sydney have reached out. And that's why we've been able to address those issues. And it's important that we keep doing that. We've all got to work together to get the best outcome for the community. So I do acknowledge those members for their advocacy.
So can I ask, I've asked about students being vaccinated. I don't think we quite got an answer before. Are you now tracking the numbers of teachers who are vaccinated, the actual proportion of teachers who are vaccinated?
Yeah, I'll get Ms. Harrisson to comment in relation to what information the department has about that.
Thank you, Ms. Houssos, for the question. I think, as is the case for all other health information, it is personal information held by the individual, not by the employer. We do not have records of vaccinations of teachers. What we do have is some understanding from the 3 local government areas where we were able to offer priority access to the Pfizer vaccine before the broader vaccination advice relating it to AstraZeneca changed. We were able to get a sense of how many teachers in those LGAs booked in. It was a very strong proportion, and I can provide the details of that on notice. But at this this stage, we are not tracking vaccinations of teachers. The appointment booking process doesn't capture that information and enable us to do that. And so we continue to encourage all of our staff to go and get vaccinated at the first opportunity they have. And we are continuing to communicate to our Year 12 students through their schools, directly in the community, and through public health channels to really go and get those vaccines that have been made available to them in those 8 LGAs.
I think Mr. Shoebridge is keen to take the questioning back.
No, yeah, thank you for stepping in, Courtney. I appreciate that. So, Minister, I think we should be very clear about this so that those students in Year 12 in those 8 affected local government areas know what the future is for their return to school. There is currently no target that you've been given by New South Wales Health of a vaccination rate that will safely see those students back at school. Is that right? You don't have a target?
As I said, sorry, Chair, I should be more formal. I apologise. What we have, as I said, in response to a question from Ms. Houssos, is an opportunity for a take-up of those vaccines now. We will continue to be guided by health in terms of what a return in those 8 LGAs may look like. Obviously, that vaccination program is important for a range of reasons. I think, as the Premier said, to provide some certainty around the written exams in October, but also more broadly. We've had conversations with health, but the focus at the moment is about getting that vaccine rollout done, getting as many students taking up that opportunity that's available to them this week. It's a massive logistical exercise to vaccinate thousands of students. I think health are doing an amazing job to make that happen. And then, as I said, we're hopeful for a very good take up, and that will be able to then determine further discussions and decisions with health in relation to schooling in those 8 LGAs.
Yep, but Minister, the Premier directly linked the vaccinations with a return to school, and there's an expectation amongst those HSC students that that link is there, but it seems
Having the same issues again, David. I'll just give him a little bit longer. David, I might just hand, I know John Graham's got one question on this issue, so I might just hand to John and see if then we can come back to David.
Great, thank you, Deputy Chair. I was just going to ask on the question of returning to where you're heading with student vaccinations. There's been some reports about the cancellation of vaccinations that had been booked in by schools, particularly as the transport was no longer on offer. Are those reports accurate? Have schools or students cancelled vaccine appointments that otherwise would have proceeded out of the 9 LGA areas?
I'll ask Ms. Owen or Mr. Dizdar if they can comment on that. What I will say in response, I guess first though, John, is that obviously we've made it clear to principals in those areas that if you have students who are not able to get to Kudos Bank Arena, we've actively gone to principals and said, you tell us if there's an issue with any of them getting there, which is why we've done that opportunity for taxis that Ms. Owen has spoken about, but also for those students with additional needs. I'm not sure whether Ms. Owen or Mr. Dizdar has any information in relation to what you've raised.
If I'll just come in, no, I'm not aware of students cancelling their appointments. As you've seen, the take-up's been very high in the first couple of days. As the Minister says, we have put out refreshed information over the last sort of 48 hours about the alternative transport arrangements for students, which I think may have made people change the way or change the day that they choose to take up that vaccine. So that would be my only explanation for anything you could have heard.
And I can add, Mr. Graham, I've personally liaised with many principals across those 8 LGAs in the suburbs in Penrith that are part of the vaccination program. We've also liaised with them in mass meetings with their directors and their executive directors. And we continue to work with them daily. We have not had reports of cancellation of appointments. More to the point has been what's been described. Principals have been acutely aware of those students with significant disadvantage, family complexity, limited transportation access.
Right, thank you. I think we've got the chair back, so I might...
and they've been really heartened that we've solved for that.
I'd hand back to either the chair or the deputy chair.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Graham. I appreciate that. I've hotspotted off my phone to try and avoid those issues. So I apologise for everybody for freezing. And I thank you all for adroitly stepping up. It's really appreciated. But Minister, when it comes to the HSC students returning outside of those 8 affected LGAs in Greater Sydney, it's true that the health advice you have now is that it can be for no more than 2 hours a day, and it's only where it's essential for the learning or essential for the well-being of a student, and it can't be for 5 days a week, and it can't be at a class level. It should be either in individual or very small groups. That's the situation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair, and that's part of the COVID safe return to school plan that we have put in place in conjunction with health. I will also take the opportunity to say I think your current internet situation is a great example of why a return to school is very important. So it's very timely that that's happening during this hearing, Mr. Chair.
Well, I think we'll get onto the digital divide in a bit, and you're pushing it against an open door in that regard. But you see, Minister, we're now in the situation that on the 16th of August, there'll be no return of HSC students in the 8 affected local government areas, and only a tiny proportion of HSC students in other affected areas in Greater Sydney coming back. And there's been this great deal of anxiety and concern and stress amongst parents and students and teachers created by the Premier's announcement. Do you accept it hasn't been well communicated and it hasn't been a good announcement for students and teachers?
No, look, I don't agree with the premise of your question, Chair. I think the fact that at the moment, as we speak, the access to school sites outside of those 8 LGAs is only for students who need to go because their parents are working and there's no other option. Schools have remained open to any student who needs to attend, but obviously our attendance rates have been very low, as you would understand. But from next week, what we have on offer for our Year 12 students across Greater Sydney is a return, and I accept it's in a limited way in line with health advice, but it is access to a school, to teachers, to equipment that they don't currently have. So it is an improvement on what we have now. It's important for essential learning activities. It shouldn't be a surprise to the committee that we're doing it in a way that is safe and sensible. Smaller groups, staggered across the day, minimising impacts and interactions between students. I think that's sensible. But if you have students who, for one reason or another, might be struggling with a particular important learning concept from home and they need to go in and have a bit of one-on-one time with their teachers, they can do that. If they need some mental health or wellbeing support or reassurance from a teacher or an educator that they trust, they'll have the opportunity to do that. That's not insignificant. That's actually really important that we provide that. And we're doing it in a way that is COVID safe, that minimises the risk, but also recognises how important it is to let students have that face-to-face access in the best way that we can.
And Chair, if I could just add...
Sorry, I will go to you in a second, Ms Harrisson, but I'll just read to you what the public health advice says, and it is quite clearly not an HSC return. It says that students will be limited in their access to schools for essential curriculum and wellbeing activity, where it is essential for the student to engage with the teaching or wellbeing staff or school facilities, and only individually or in small groups. There's this pretense that this is consistent with the Premier's announcement, and it just simply isn't, is it?
Well, again, I don't agree with your question or the sentiment that you're putting. We have made it clear that we want to provide that opportunity for students to have that interaction. They don't currently have it. They will from next week. It's been done with health to limit the risk, but provide that opportunity. And I think that certainly the feedback that I've had from across the sectors and from our principals groups is that they think it's a measured and a balanced approach. Everybody recognises, like I said, that learning from home is a challenge. For some of our students in particular, as I said in my opening remarks, schools can be their safest places. It's important that we provide that opportunity for them. That's what we've done. And I think we've struck the right balance in terms of a safe and sensible return. And I think that would be backed in by many of our stakeholders.
Oh, well, Minister, this proposed return, which is extremely limited, it's far from what the Premier announced. and is focused and now has the underpinning of public health advice, I think has been welcomed and supported by the teachers' unions and by teachers as well as by students. But why didn't you sit down with the Teachers Federation at the very beginning and negotiate this kind of safe return and get rid of all that uncertainty and anxiety that's happened over the last 2 weeks?
Well, like I said earlier, Mr. Chair, we've been continuing to engage with key stakeholders right throughout this term. Of course, that includes our parents, our students, our teachers' organisations, our principals groups. That will continue. The Premier very clearly announced our intention to have HSC students return from the 16th. From the 16th, we will be having HSC students back on site in a COVID-safe way under health advice. We've worked through how that will work in a practical sense over the last period of time with our school communities. That's exactly what we've delivered.
Minister, don't you think it would be sensible for future planning to sit down and do the planning together with the teachers' unions, you know, who have such a wealth of knowledge about how schools actually work? Because it was really the teachers' unions who came out and forced this rethink, wasn't it, about the HSC return? Don't you think it's better to work with them in advance?
Well, like I said, we will continue to engage with the wide range of stakeholders that we have in education in terms of the issues related to COVID. I think the most important people that we need to sit down with all due respect, are our health experts in terms of what a COVID-safe return to school looks like. As I said earlier, we are engaging with our key stakeholder groups, our parents, our students, our teaching representatives, our principal representatives, and we'll continue to do that. Ms Harrisson can comment a bit further on some of the work that she and the team have been doing in this space. We'll continue to talk to everybody in education about the way forward, noting, of course, Mr Shoebridge, that, you know, different stakeholders also have different views. We're talking to the Catholic and independent sectors as well. We will do this in collaboration, but the people that we've got to put first at all of our decisions are our students. We have to do what is best for them and their education, and I don't apologise for that.
But Minister, the initial proposal from the Premier, you say the best interests of students need to be considered. There was no public health advice to say that the return to school from the 16th of August was going to actually be safe for students or teachers. And indeed, the current public health advice suggests that the Premier's original plan would have been very unsafe. And I'm asking you if you're going to have better future planning going forward so as we don't have this kind of flip-flopping and uncertainty.
Well, like I've said in earlier questioning, Mr Chair, government decisions, which are whole of government decisions based on advice from many people, including the health experts, have certainly been to plan for that return for the 16th of August. That's what we've done. That's the work that has been underway, and the position that we've landed in terms of how that return will play out from next week has been done in consultation with health and our stakeholders. Of course, we'll continue to consult with them. That's what we do. And I think, as Ms Harrisson said, you know, there are very frequent conversations with all of our education stakeholders, with myself, with my office, with key members of the department, with NESA, and I note that Mr Martin's here. You know, we are all working together on this, recognising that it's very important that we get this right in terms of returning students to the classroom, and that consultation will continue.
Well, if there is some public health advice that was available to you as at the Premier's initial announcement a fortnight ago, will you provide that advice to the committee, and will you provide that advice to, more importantly, to students and the teachers? Will you provide the advice that underpinned the Premier's initial announcement?
Well, probably to echo comments made in your hearing yesterday, obviously, you know, those considerations that are whole of government or through a cabinet process, I'm not at liberty to go into those details. But what we do have in terms of health advice is the return to school COVID safe plan, which is co-branded, co-designed between education and health for our Year 12 students. That is available. It's available for all our schools. It's publicly available and very clearly states what we need to do in terms of that return. You yourself, Mr Chair, have read out some of that advice in terms of how schools need to manage that going forward. So that information is already publicly available.
And Chair, if I could add on this line of questioning, when the Premier announced her intention and we spoke to stakeholders ahead of that announcement, one of the things we made clear is that we would work with our stakeholders in determining the best way to do that from here, as we have done through the last 10 days, and ended up in a place that I think everyone is supportive of for both students and staff across Greater Sydney, where they're able to return in that limited and controlled way. And could I also just add, for those year 12 students who are returning in that limited and controlled way, they will continue to be supported with learning from home. And I just want to make sure that we are recognising and acknowledging that work that teachers are doing at the moment in that ongoing support of year 12. When I've spoken to principals, they are making personal phone calls to individual students to check on their well-being, to check they're okay. They're looking forward to being able to see some of those students in coming weeks and to check on their progress and study and to check on their well-being, as well as then continuing to deliver that online and remote learning support as those students learn from home.
Thanks, Ms Harrisson, and I apologise to the witnesses and committee members for that somewhat interrupted line of questioning, and I'm now happy to hand over effectively, I hope, to John Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I might just ask about students in year 11 who are actually doing their HSC exams this year. This applies, as I understand it, to some students. The particular group I want to ask about are Tamil language learners. They're in year 11 at their main school. They're in a hotspot. They're due to sit, across a range of schools, they're due to sit their Tamil language oral exam on September the 4th. Their written exam on the 19th of October. These students are in a hotspot. They've got their exam in less than a month. They're in year 11. Can they get vaccinated? At the moment, they haven't been able to find a way to do that.
I might get Ms Harrisson to comment on that one.
And so we have some very explicit eligibility criteria for the vaccination. You'll appreciate that we continue to manage within constrained supply of the Pfizer vaccine, and that is the only vaccine available for use in that age cohort. It does include, though, anyone aged 16 and above sitting part of their final examinations this year. So if there are details where we have not been, if there are examples you have where we've not been able to gather the information necessary to contact individuals, please send that through and we'll be very happy to follow up. If someone is eligible, there is a vaccine there for them, and we want to make sure they're getting the chance to come forward and get that vaccination.
Great, that's much appreciated, and we'll provide those details. Chair, I'd like to follow on from where you were asking about this amended return to school. Minister, the question to you, I acknowledge this is a step forward, but I have to agree with the Chair. It's a long way from the Premier's return to school. Originally, there were more than 50,000 students from Greater Sydney who were going to return to face-to-face learning. All their teachers would have had to go back, their support staff, parents might have had to drop them off at given we're on the Sunday timetable. It was a large number of people moving around Sydney. Now, more than 20,000 of them in those 9 affected areas will stay at home. Of the remaining 30,000, they're only turning up to school when it's essential. How many students are we going to see moving around Sydney under these new plans?
Again, I might get Ms Harrisson to provide some more comment in relation to that. But what I will say is that we're continuing, obviously, to work with our school communities, with our principals, to make sure that we provide that opportunity for access. And I think it's really important too. I mean, and I know that you would all appreciate this, is we've got very diverse school communities across New South Wales and even across Greater Sydney, differing numbers of students doing certain exams, different subjects and the take up of those, and all of that is part of what we need to consider and what schools will consider in terms of their student need when they look at scheduling and rostering who's coming on into school on what day and for what reason. There's some really, really great work being done by our school communities, and I know that Mr Dizdar and Ms Nixon could comment further on that about how they're making it work in their local school context. And that's important because, like I said, we've got to give flexibility. We've got to recognise that our school communities are different, that each student's personal situation is different. And that's why I think
given those complexities, Minister, perhaps Ms Harrisson could tell us how many students will be moving across Sydney. That's clearly the challenge that the Chief Health Officer was identifying, this mobility challenge. how many students now under this dramatically scaled back return, if you can call it that, will be moving across Sydney? Do we know that?
So what I can tell you, Mr. Graham, is that we have worked with the Chief Health Officer and her team, and we have adopted all of the public health advice into the COVID safe plan for the return of Year 12. We accept that it is in a limited way that we're able to safely bring Year 12 back. I think the whole community would only expect us to operate in a way that is COVID safe at this time, and that's certainly what we're doing. And we've, in conjunction with the public health team, feel that we've got the balance right between those mobility issues that you raise and the benefits to our students of having the opportunity to connect with their teachers.
So Ms. Harrisson, when you say we've got the balance right, how do you know how many students will be moving across Sydney?
So I don't have specific numbers. It will depend vastly on individual and local school plans and the way they intend to bring those students back in those very contained and controlled measures as are set out in that plan. We also know that...
So the answer really is at a central level, we have no idea how many of those students will be moving across.
Well, so
we know it's less than it would have been, but we don't know how many centrally.
So we don't know centrally, but what we do know is that in preparation for any additional movement, we need to make sure we're providing additional provision for transport. And so we are working with New South Wales Transport to make sure additional bus routes are available to support students who use that method of transport to get to school to maintain their COVID safe operations. We are putting in place every sensible and practical measure that we can to support our Year 12 students to get back to school in some form, to get the support
they need.
Thank you, Ms.
Harrisson. I think you've answered my question. Can I move on to the KPMG report, or you may object to that term, but the KPMG consultancy...
It's not a report. We answered that earlier.
Yeah, the KPMG consultancy. Ms. Harrisson, perhaps, although Minister, feel free to answer this. What is the cost of that work?
I'll get Ms. Harrisson to respond to that one.
And so I think, as I indicated in my answers earlier, we have seconded 4 staff from KPMG for a period of time into the organisation. We will use that resource over the coming weeks, and I'll be happy following that once we have that final cost to share that back with the committee. But at this stage, I don't have the specific costs on what will happen in the future, but I will, when that has completed, be able to provide some advice on notice.
That's appreciated. A question then to the Minister. I'm returning now to my first set of questions about the initial announcement about the Premier's preferred return to school model. I took Ms. Harrisson's answer about when the teacher unions were informed as to say they were informed after the decision was made by Crisis Cabinet, but before the announcement was made by the Premier. That is, they had no input into the decision. Is that when you were informed, after the Crisis Cabinet made the decision and before it was announced by the Premier?
Well, as I said in response to your earlier questions, John, I have been in constant consultation and have been able to provide input and work with my colleagues on Crisis Cabinet for all matters that relate to education in relation to the pandemic.
Well, I am.
Well, John, as I said earlier, I'm not going to go into the specifics of a cabinet subcommittee process. They are very common to have cabinet subcommittees, and ministers who have input, who have responsibility for portfolio areas, absolutely have the opportunity to be involved in those discussions. I'm not going to go into the detail; that's not appropriate. But what you're inferring is that I wasn't involved or wasn't aware, and that's just not the case.
Is that you agree, though, that the teacher unions, all those principals, they may have been informed, they were informed after that decision was made, they had no input?
Well, I don't agree that they have not had the chance to have input. They have been able to talk to me, to my staff, to the secretary, department staff throughout the pandemic, and often do. There are lots of conversations and meetings that have taken place with a range of stakeholders, as you would expect. But ultimately, the government makes decisions, cabinet ministers make decisions, and that is the way that these processes work. As Ms. Harrisson said, we take the advice, particularly in relation to the advice coming from health in relation to these matters. stakeholders were made aware of the government's intention in terms of bringing our Year 12 students back on the 16th. They were made aware before that announcement was publicly made, and they have been involved and consulted in terms of the plan where we've landed. And that is across the sectors, you know, the Catholic and independent sectors as well. That's important. We've got to make sure we're looking after all of our school students in New South Wales.
Well, Minister, can I ask you then, when did you provide that information to the to the independent and to the Catholic sector? Was that at the same time as the unions were informed?
Yes, Ms Harrisson was the one who had those conversations. I think she said earlier it was either that evening or the morning of, but yes, that they are also a part of the stakeholder group that we speak to about government decisions.
Ms Houssos, I can confirm that I spoke to the head of the Teachers Federation, the head of the Secondary Principals Council, the head of the Catholic education sector and the head of the independent school sector in relation to that announcement ahead of it being made.
Thanks, Courtney.
Sorry, David, are we going now into our final?
I think actually that round is now concluded according to the timekeeping from the Secretariat.
Okay.
Ms Harrisson, you said that 4 people have been seconded from KPMG to work on the return to school plan to address the COVID safety return to school plan. Is that right? 4 people?
I did not say that they had been seconded to work on the COVID safe return. I've been very clear they have been seconded to work in a programme management office and to help us keep track of all the number of work streams we have underway in relation to the COVID response. They are not working on the plan. They are seconded to manage and lead for us the setup of a programme management office.
Do any of them have public health or teaching experience? Because it's been widely reported that, in fact, some of the experience comes from being British parachute officers. Do any of them have public health or education experience?
So they have been seconded to work in a programme management office, and they all have experience in programme management. That is the skill set they are bringing to us. They will not be providing education or public health advice, so I'm not sure that is a relevant skill set for us to be looking for in them. We are asking them to provide programme management support. That is what they bring experience in, and that is what we will be utilising in our response.
All right, so I take it from that none of them have public health or education experience. Is that right?
I don't have the details of all of their resumes with me, but I think that is a fair assumption, given that they are not being asked to come in and provide public health or education advice. They are coming in to support a programme management office on secondment from an external firm.
All right. If you've got any more details, if you could provide that on notice and including the cost, that would be very useful. Could I ask you, Minister, about the digital divide? We've experienced a little bit of that in this inquiry, but it's a very serious matter for thousands and thousands and thousands of students, but not least those in southwest and western Sydney, where we have that, relative economic disadvantage. Do you have any data on the number of students who are logging in by school or by postcode or by region that gives you a sense of how the digital divide is going?
Yeah, I can certainly ask Ms Owen to see if she's got any advice around that. A couple of points I will make, Mr Chair, is obviously that as a department we are also working closely with schools to provide devices, internet dongles for students who do have limited access to technology. I'm sure all committee members will be aware that we did that last year, and we've also procured additional devices and dongles that have gone out this year, and happy to provide those figures either now or on notice. Can I say also it's important to make the point that a lot of our schools are doing different ways to provide and engage that education for their students. Many of them are using online technology. Many of our schools are using packs and getting some material out to their students as well to make sure that they're accommodating for all of the needs. I met, as I said earlier, with a group of principals, particularly from southwestern Sydney last week. They were all extremely grateful for the internet devices and technology that had been provided to them in their schools. Schools are also able to loan out existing devices that they've got. And we're still saying to school communities and parents now, if there is more that you need, let us know. We have stock, we can provide more, we can procure more as well. So there really has been an amazing amount of work done to support students where there are concerns and access around digital technology. I don't know if Ms. Owen wants to comment.
Let's see if we could get some numbers actually, Minister,
Yep.
which is what I was looking at, proportions and numbers. Do we have that?
So in terms of devices that have gone out, so far this year, we've provided 6,250 devices and 5,629 internet access devices, which are dongles and SIM cards as of the 5th of August. This builds on last year's devices that we had, which were 13,666 devices and 8,517 internet access devices. So literally thousands of tablets, of notebooks and also dongles and SIM cards available to students who need them.
Minister, on those numbers this year, that's to less than 1% of the student population, isn't it? That's less than 1%.
What we've done, and again, Ms. Harrisson might want to comment, what we have done has said to school is say to schools, you tell us what you need. Of course, as I said earlier, David, a lot of schools or students will have their own devices. Schools can also loan out their existing devices to their school communities to use as well. So I would caution the committee in making the assumption that this number of devices and internet access devices are the only ones that are available, because they don't also take into account ones that schools can loan or also devices that students themselves may have as well.
So yes, I can provide some further information. We went out to schools ahead of the end of term 2 and asked them explicitly what they needed support with in preparing for potential learning from home. Should we be required to use it? That included an ask if they had one for devices and dongles. We sent out devices to everyone who requested them. We have then sought to send out further devices to increase the ratios of devices in our schools, particularly in South West Sydney, based on the socioeconomic modelling that we have around communities, to make sure we're getting as many devices and dongles into the communities that need them. When I have spoken, and I've spoken to a number of our principals in South West Sydney, one of the things that they come back to us with is actually that technology isn't always the thing that's going to help them, that the students that they are supporting need support learning at home. They may not have space or a quiet room at home in order to do that work. And so for them, making sure that they can safely return those students in line with the COVID Safe Plan is a really important part as we move forward for them to be able to support those students. So I think we are really clear that we need to get more devices out. We have done so. With dongles, we reactivated every dongle we sent out last year. So we have provided internet access for just over 15,000 students across the state, with a large proportion of that in South West Sydney. So I'm very happy to get you further details on notice, but I think in terms of the responsibilities of the Education Department here, we are doing everything we can to get the technology in the hands of those that need it.
Mr. Chair, I think Ms. Owen's got some download data as well, which might be useful to you as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks, Ms. Owen.
So I'll provide the committee with the download data on notice, but just to address your question, Chair, in terms of understanding where the demand is, we are tracking the download of all the different websites and resources that we've put on our Learning from Home hub. Those are in the hundreds of thousands. Those are like hundreds of different pages, so not appropriate to give you the detail here, but we will provide on notice how our schools have been downloading those key resources, which are the most highly downloaded data and downloaded resources, which shows how they're accessing the information online, as well as the information we have about how they use multiple channels between downloaded information, online videos and paper packs as well.
Well, I think that would be useful, and if it could be broken down by school community or postcode or LGA, that would be useful. But
I don't think we'd be able to download the data in that way, unfortunately. We'll be able to give you global figures for the downloads of information, but I don't think we would have that broken down by geography.
Well, I think it'll be difficult to use that to understand how the digital divide has really impacted if it's just global figures, but we'll get what we get. You don't have any data then about the number or proportion of students that are logging onto Google Classroom or to Zoom sessions, so as we have some understanding about whether or not it's what the differential is between different socioeconomic parts of the state. You don't have any of that data.
So we can certainly look and see what of that data is available to us, and happy to provide what we can find on notice. I do want to draw the committee's attention to the fact that we are supporting learning from home, not learning online. Our schools are going above and beyond in providing support for students in multiple forms, both addressing where there may or may not be adequate access to technology or suitable internet speed, but also matching the needs of students in their classes and how they work. We're seeing many schools offer both options. We're seeing many schools make sure and go to exceptional lengths to make sure that their school communities can safely collect and engage in learning in a paper form, with really exceptional resources being prepared by our teachers for students to take home. So again, I just want to I really want to reiterate that thanks to the teaching workforce for all they have done in supporting those students. They are working exceptionally hard at the moment to make sure that those students are well supported in their learning, no matter whether or not they have access to a device.
Thanks, Ms. Harrisson. Could we just go back quickly to the vaccination of teachers? Is it true that the department has no actual program and there is no prioritisation for teachers to get vaccinated as part of the return to school plans? Is that the case? There's no prioritisation of teachers?
Well, obviously, David, you'd be aware that the vaccine rollout isn't done by education, but I think I've been pretty clear in my public comments about this. You know, anyone over the age of 18 now in New South Wales is able to get a vaccine, and that's what our teachers should be doing. We're very strong on our messaging in relation to that. We think it's important that everybody in the community, but particularly our teachers as leaders, are the ones that go and get vaccinated. We were able to provide that priority access, as Ms. Harrisson said, to our educators in those first 3 LGA hotspots in Western Sydney for Pfizer. That was before the health advice changed in relation to AstraZeneca. But as we speak to you today, anyone in New South Wales over the age of 18 can go and book an appointment, can walk into many pharmacists, many of the vaccine hubs and get vaccinated. That's what they should be doing.
All right. So I think you gave a figure that some 51% of teachers aged above 40 had been vaccinated. Was that
No, sorry. 51% of our teachers, my understanding is, and I'm happy to be corrected, but the figures that I have seen is that 51% of our teachers in the public system are aged 40 and over, so therefore have been eligible for a vaccine for some period of time.
Oh. So do you know what proportion of the teachers have been vaccinated?
Ms. Harrisson did address this a little earlier in a question from Ms. Houssos, I think when you weren't online, David, but I'm happy for her to respond.
Thank you. So vaccination data remains a personal form of data collected in your Medicare. It is not part of the booking process. We do not capture people's professions as part of their booking for a vaccine. So we have no way in the Department of Education of centrally knowing whether or not a teacher has been vaccinated.
And there's no policy of requiring teachers to inform the department about their vaccination status?
So no, that there is no such policy at this time.
Are you intending to sit down with the unions and work through these very difficult issues? Have you got a process to work through those issues?
So I have had an initial discussion with the union already around vaccinations of teachers and how we might look at that moving forward, a very initial conversation. And we have our joint consultative committee in operation through this time. They met yesterday, they will meet again and continue to meet, and we will discuss all the issues that are important to our teachers in terms of planning for a future return to school when it is possible to do so.
Look, my final question is this. Is to you, Minister, and it's about whether or not there is a coherent plan that will get HSC students safely sitting down to do their HSC exams by mid-October. I think we can all agree the 16 August deadline will come and go and won't actually be a real deadline, but there's that hard deadline, isn't there, in mid-October for the HSC? Is there a coherent, safe plan to get HSC students back for that?
Sure. I might ask Mr. Martin to make a bit of a comment on this, given he's been with us for the hearing, and I'd hate to deny him the opportunity to provide some of his expertise. But I'll just say more broadly, of course, we are working with health in terms of designing what a COVID-safe HSC exam period looks like. It is absolutely our intention for those exams to go ahead. NSW have already pushed those exams back a week, which is what we did last year. Looking at things like extra venues, extra invigilators, what is the public health advice we need to be able to do those exams safely? That work has begun and will of course continue, but I will ask Mr. Martin to make a brief comment about that as well, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. As people may be aware, we have a committee comprising the 3 heads of sectors and 2 senior NSW board members on COVID emergency committee. We've been sequentially making decisions right across the course of this year, meeting twice, sometimes 3 times a week. Yes, of course, it has been on the agenda of that committee to take into account all the health considerations to make sure that the exams can run as smoothly as possible based on what we are given as health requirements on the day. Last year, people may remember, we were able to do that by having ready alternative venues, additional invigilators and supervisors, COVID safe entry into exams, etc., etc. So yes, the various plans are being thought out and considered at the moment.
Well, unfortunately, our time has expired. But could I, on behalf of the committee, thank the Minister and your staff and the staff from the department about the very productive and useful exchange we've had today. The cooperation has been noted, and I think on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate it. But Minister, you won't get away without one more question from Ms. Houssos, I'm sorry. And it may be you take it on notice, but I'll pass over to Courtney.
Thanks very much, David. Yes, given the technological difficulties today, I just had one final question for you. Are you able to provide, and I assume you'd need to take this on notice, a breakdown of the attendance rates for schools either by LGA or by postcode of some description? Just a snapshot at some point over the last, whilst the period has been learning from home, whilst we have been learning from home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can provide that on notice. What I will say is that broadly we've seen a very low attendance rate. It's averaged roughly about 92-93% of students learning from home across that whole Greater Sydney area. Obviously, we've seen less attendance in those 8 LGAs as well. And then as our regional communities have been brought in and out of lockdown, that's had an impact too. But by and large, we've had very good response from our families to keep their children at home where they can. We've seen consistent numbers in terms of our overall attendance rates, but happy to provide some more detail on notice to the committee.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, can I just share our thanks to the Minister for the manner in which he's answered questions as well. It's been very much appreciated.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you all again.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we should try and come together sometime when it's safe to do so. Yeah, so Minister and all of the team at the department, thanks again. We'll have a short recess and come back again at 2:15. I just remind committee members that the feed will continue on YouTube, and unless you want the public to have an insight into your next 15 minutes at home, I would suggest you place it on mute and turn off the video. So thanks again, Minister.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, welcome, Mr. Garrett. So, Mr. Northam, we're just waiting for the balance of the committee to come on board, and then we'll commence. Well, I'd like to welcome people back to the afternoon session of the Public Accountability Committee's COVID oversight hearing, focusing today on education and schools. Could I first of all, I'll ask those, any witness or committee member who's not muted, if you could just mute to ensure that we don't get feedback. Our two witnesses this afternoon are Mr. Angelo Gavrielatis, the President of the New South Wales Teachers Federation, and Mr. Mark Northam, the Secretary of the Independent Education Union of New South Wales and the ACT. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. If I could just go through the formalities and swear you in, and I might start with you, Mr. Gavrielatis. If you could give your name, your position, and then take either an oath or an affirmation.
Thank you. Angelo Gavrielatis, President, New South Wales Teachers Federation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thanks, Mr. Gavrielatis. Mr. Northam.
Thanks. My name's Mark Northam. I'm the Secretary of the New South Wales ACT Independent Education Union of Australia. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Again, we do thank you for your attendance today. Would you each like to make a brief opening statement if you have one prepared, and then we'll go straight to questioning from the opposition. We have very limited time, so if the statements could be brief, that'd be really appreciated. And we might just go in the same order, Mr. Gavrielatis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Shoebridge. Before I start, can I please acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands upon which this hearing is taking place and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Mr. Shoebridge, I really need to start by putting on public record our deepest respect and admiration for the entire teaching service, our teachers and principals and support staff who continue to perform over and above the call of duty during this second wave of this pandemic. And I say that because quite often when there is discussion and deliberation about the impact of the pandemic on education, it is seen through the prism or prosecuted through the prism of the impact on students, as it should. But it's often forgotten that there is another important component part of education, that is teachers, principals and our support staff, who coincidentally, and I know you don't need to be reminded of this, are also parents, are also grandparents, are also brothers and sisters, are also uncle and aunts. Therefore, they're impacted by this not only on a professional level, but also like every other member of the general public on a personal level as well. Mr. Shoebridge, I want to make these very brief points. As a teaching profession, we've always said, in the context of the pandemic, that we will always observe the health advice and we always seek the consistent application of the health advice across all settings in impacted communities. We've always said that what we will do and how we will contribute will always be informed by the need to put the health and safety of our students, the teaching service and our families first. It is therefore I need to put on record how shocked we were to learn through the media in the evening of the 27th of July, the government's decision to announce what is now clearly the premature, ill-conceived return of Year 12 from the 16th of August as had been intended by the government. It defied logic, it defied the health advice, it defied science, and I repeat, that decision was taken without any prior consultation with the profession. We learnt of it through the media at about 6:30, 7 p.m. that evening, and it was followed by a phone call at approximately 8:30 p.m. that evening. We were shocked and appalled because only a few days earlier, the Premier had announced a national emergency against the backdrop of ever-increasing cases, and of course, those cases continue to increase. And very disturbingly, the cases are impacting our young people. 27% of all infections are amongst people under the age of 19. We want our students back. We want our students back. No one wants them back more than teachers, after their parents, of course. But we want them back when it's safe. We were therefore appalled, further appalled, a couple of days later, on the same day that there were 239 cases, to read in the media a comment from the Minister saying, "I find it disappointing that organisations who should put the interests of students first are effectively lobbying for the HSC cohort in Greater Sydney to stay at home and missing out on the opportunity of face-to-face teaching." I put on record that offends us to the core. It offends us to the core. We became teachers because of that, our belief in the transformative power of education and what it means to each individual child, their families and communities. We are offended by such comments. We remain ready, and I'll finish with this, and I know you're trying to wind me up, Mr. Shoebridge, and I know we'll be able to come back to some issues. We remain ready, and we've said this repeatedly, to work constructively, noting this is a pandemic. There is no rule book, there is no blueprint. We've indicated repeatedly our willingness to work constructively with the government on that necessary roadmap to see the return in one form or another of our students when it is safe to do so.
Thanks so much, Mr. Gavriladis, and I apologise for giving you that indication, but we do want to get to questioning. I think it'll be really fruitful. Mr. Northam.
Mr. Shoebridge, I'm joining today's meeting from the land of the Biripi people in the Newcastle area, and just acknowledge the traditional owners and their leaders, both past and present. I'd like to firstly thank the opportunity to address this committee because I think it's important work. It is now widely accepted that keeping schools open is as much an economic decision as it is an educational imperative. Teachers understand this, and I can assure you the profession stands ready to do its bit. What our members don't understand is why significant decisions about how schools operate are being made without meaningful and effective communication with the profession. Throughout the pandemic, there's been a consistent and disappointing pattern of teacher unions being marginalised and the voice of teachers being excluded from decision-making processes. This was in evidence last year when the community was grappling with the closure of schools at the commencement of the first lockdown. Teachers spent their Easter break preparing for an extended period of online learning, yet within weeks of school resuming, they were thrust back into face-to-face teaching as business interests insisted schools remain open, despite many school workplaces being ill-equipped to do so. The lack of meaningful engagement with the profession at this time created a considerable amount of unnecessary stress for students, staff and families and the school communities they serve. Now in this most recent debate regarding the HSC trials, teachers and teacher unions have been accused widely in the media of being obstructionist. Nothing could be further from the truth. As any HSC teacher knows, running the trial HSC exams as originally scheduled was both unnecessary to satisfy assessment requirements and entirely unfeasible from a logistical perspective, given the pressing health advice at the time. Yet this position was stubbornly pursued with an increasing sense of alarm and confusion. Meanwhile, school principals and staff were finding about decisions which intimately affected the day-to-day running of their schools through media releases. Teachers are tired of hearing their concerns dismissed with the phrase, "with the benefit of hindsight." 12 months ago, the union quite reasonably predicted the most inevitable outbreak would result in school closures and further pressure on teachers, students and families coping with online learning. Yet our call for school staff to be prioritised for vaccination has consistently fallen on deaf ears throughout that time. In recent months, this position has gained some support. Non-government school employers, however, have shown little appetite to facilitate this process by providing easily accessible and understandable vaccination leave. After Monday's disappointing comments by the Premier implying that teacher hesitancy was somehow responsible for low vaccination levels among school staff, our social media platforms lit up with teacher and support staff telling us that many of them continue to be excluded from the priority list, and where they were eligible, supply issues made it almost impossible for them to obtain the jab. Teachers living in the Central Coast and other areas of the state, but who work in one of the 8 hotspots, reported having their appointments abruptly cancelled as the vaccines were redirected to students. The very students that these unvaccinated teachers would be sharing a classroom with in the following week. For more than 12 months, our members have been going above and beyond, as they always do, to support all students, especially those going through the HSC. What we ask is a respectful level of engagement with the profession, which will allow greater understanding as to why decisions are being made, and where necessary, provide us with an opportunity to explore and suggest more suitable alternatives. It should not have taken this current public embarrassment for teacher unions to be finally given a place at the table. Teachers and their unions know how schools operate and how to get things done. We are asking that you talk to teacher unions about what you want to achieve, and we will help them find the solutions to get it done. Thanks, Mr. Shoebridge.
Oh, no, thank you, Mr. Northam, and thank you, Mr. Gavriladis. And I just want to give my own appreciation of the work of your members. Anybody who didn't love and respect the teaching profession before the lockdown and homeschooling, I can tell you now, it is uniformly acknowledged the extraordinary work that teachers do. I'll hand over to the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. I'll second that particular observation. John Graham, a question to you both. And look, you've answered my very first question about consultation in your opening statements. We were really informed that you were not consulted, you were simply informed after this decision had been made. You've reflected on that already. Perhaps you might like to respond to this though. Aren't we in danger of repeating that same mistake again with the news today that instead of asking the thousands of senior educators across New South Wales, the department is bringing in KPMG and a former British paratroop regiment officer with a specialisation in financial services operating models, rather than ask educators to deal with this return to school. When the minister was asked about it, her view was KPMG is not leading this work, but the departmental memo says clearly KPMG will take the initial lead on scoping this piece of work. Can you shed any light on this? What is your view about this development?
Well, our knowledge with respect to what you're referring to, Mr. Graham, is based on what we read in the newspaper. I'll respond in this way, if I may. The experience can be found within the teaching service. The answer lies within when it comes to the development of a roadmap for the return of our students, whether immediately or in a staggered approach, whatever the means may be, depending on the health advice, the answer and the experience and the expertise lies within. It's found within our teachers and principals, all of whom know a thing or two or three or four about how to run a school and the intricate operations, the complexities of running a school. It beggars belief. It beggars belief that we're seeing this approach taken in relation to the roadmap. The roadmap can only be developed in consultation with the profession. And the other important part of that, of course, is that is so necessary with respect to trust and confidence in moving forward in what is a very difficult set of circumstances with the pandemic.
Thanks for your question as well, Mr. Graham. Look, I found it incredulous as I read the press this morning. We had one of our member principals out of the Parramatta Diocese, and you've got a picture of the school that he's in, Stanhope Gardens, has 1,800 students, 186 staff. This is a small town that operates every day. It is complex running a school, but the skills and knowledge are embedded in the profession, and they should be involved in whatever the steps the government's planning to make it work. You just cannot park accumulated experience that's so easily obtainable and leave it on the shelf.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gavrielatos, and to Mr. Northam for your time this afternoon. And can I too express our just unbelievable appreciation for what teachers and parents are doing to go above and beyond at the moment. We certainly recognise that that's particularly during this remote learning period, but has been over the course of the pandemic. So thanks very much for that. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Gavrielatos, you said in your opening that obviously we want our children, we want our students back at school, but we want it to be safe. And a key part of that is going to be vaccinating our teachers. So can I ask you, Mr. Gavrielatos first, and then Mr. Northam as well, just to reflect on, we've learnt this morning that the department isn't tracking numbers of the rates of teacher vaccinations. And we know as well that they have refused to give teachers under the age of 40 access to Pfizer, except in very limited circumstances. Can you provide a reflection on both of those? How important is teacher vaccination going to be going forward to allow students to return? And what do you think of the Department of Education's admission that they're not tracking the rates of teacher vaccinations?
So thank you, Ms. Houssos. The union started making representations about the prioritisation of teachers with respect to a vaccination rollout in August of last year. In February of this year, we acknowledged and we congratulated the New South Wales Minister, Minister Mitchell, who also made representations to Canberra with respect to the prioritisation of this year, of the vaccination rollout for teachers. Had it not been for the monumental failure on the part of the federal government, we would have all been vaccinated at the end of March, but I think we all know how that's gone. We continue to make representations, and finally we got a breakthrough, and we acknowledge the government, Minister Mitchell and Premier Berejiklian, for having announced a prioritisation of all teachers and thereafter education workers and thereafter early childhood education teachers for working in the Fairfield, Liverpool and Canberra Bankstown LGAs. We applauded that announcement to prioritise those staff. We saw that as an important breakthrough, but always as a first step. Regrettably, that prioritisation was not extended beyond those 3 LGAs, certainly not across the 8 LGAs that are now part of that hotspot, nor the eastern ward of Penrith, which has been added to that prioritisation. And that is causing us deep concern. And as Mr. Northam already said, against that backdrop of not achieving a prioritisation across the board, certainly across those hotspot LGAs, the Greater Sydney area and all the state, we saw the circumstances unfold on the weekend of the 31st of July and 1st of August, where our teachers in the Hunter were having their appointments cancelled, but were still, if I can put it in those terms, our teachers in the Central Coast, which is part of the Greater Sydney area as defined by the Public Health Order, also having their vaccinations cancelled. There still remain significant issues with respect to access and supply. And with respect to supply, if I can refer to Pfizer, 47% of teachers, 48% of teachers are under the age of 40. 80% of them are women. Just do the maths in terms of how many are pregnant, do the maths in terms of immunocompromised teachers, all of whom are finding it very difficult to access vaccination rollouts in terms of supply with Pfizer, but also access in terms of the timely appointments for AstraZeneca as well. And that is reflected across the state in terms of issues of supply and access.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gabrielatos. Mr. Northam.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Houssos, for that question. Look, the angst and anxiety amongst our members around this issue is palpable. And as Mr. Gabrielatos indicated, we did welcome that news initially. We thought there might be a planned rollout for teachers and support staff in schools, but it hasn't eventuated. But look, teacher vaccination in recent days, I've met with, yesterday afternoon, I met with 60 Sydney principals across the what's known as the Archdiocese of Sydney, the largest Catholic diocese in Australia, and the week prior to that with Parramatta principals. And the absolute and fervent belief of those principals, educational leaders, they want to get back to teaching and learning, but believe the only way forward is for the teachers and support staff workers in schools to be prioritised. As Mr. Gabrielatos pointed out, both teacher unions have been advocating not to queue jump initially. We were inordinately careful not to go into that space, and nor should we. But in recent times, we understand that our Queensland counterparts have moved into some sort of planned rollout. And I think New South Wales has got to give serious consideration for that. I won't answer the second part of your question about the Department of Education, but just point out that the Independent Education Unions deals with a multiplicity of employers. So literally hundreds in the early childhood, long daycare, all the way through to English colleges and anything in between. So it's a really sort of a mixed bag, but it is the way forward, and it has to happen for our members in schools to feel safe and be able to return to some form of teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Northam. Mr. Gabrielatos, I wanted to ask a specific question to you. Part of the announcement on the return to of Year 12 students was based on the on the introduction of rapid antigen testing. How realistic do you think this is in actually being introduced in our New South Wales public schools?
The suggestion of the use of rapid antigen testing coincided with the government's premature announcement for the return of Year 12s on the 16th of August, the premature announcement, the announcement without a plan. We have not heard anything since, well, certainly not in the last week, about rapid antigen testing following the government's reversal of that premature announcement. We do understand that the TGA has not provided, to date approved the use of the rapid antigen testing, certainly with respect to self-administration. And logistically, whilst we suspect it's not on the table at the moment, we wouldn't know. There's been no consultation with us. The consideration of it, the mere thought of it, would be an administrative nightmare. I think I'd ask the inquiry, the panel, to appreciate that some of our schools are very large operations, and Mr. Northam's already given one example. We have a school that has a Year 12 of 500 students. When you add 100 teachers to that, you're talking about 600 people on site on any one day. And it's mind-boggling to try and work out how rapid antigen testing each day would work in our environments. So these are serious logistical issues that if we're brought to the table, we could offer advice about, given, as I said, we know a bit about school operations because we live it and experience it, unlike others who graduate from schools of finance and accountancy.
Thanks, Mr. Houssos. Look, I'll just echo that. I'm in Newcastle, the closest Catholic systemic high school to me, a couple of kilometres away as the crow flies, has approaching 500 HSC students in it. Now, to suggest that you would be rapid testing these students 15 minutes at a time, as I understand it, and a teacher observing it, and then what do you do if someone turns up with a positive result? Just the mechanics of it, a beggar belief. I don't think it's a reasonable way forward. It might be with small numbers of students, but on a large scale across New South Wales, I just don't think, again, it's the way forward because it's unachievable.
David Shoebridge here. Mr. Gavriladis, have you had the opportunity to have a face-to-face, almost certainly by either Zoom or WebEx, but a face-to-face meeting with the Minister to discuss these issues? And I'll ask the same question to you, Mr. Northam, as well.
No. I don't know. I'll say it again, no.
Yeah. Mr. Northam?
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
And I assume you're both willing to have that meeting, and if the Minister or some of her staff are listening now, the invitation is well open to have that constructive meeting to talk through some of these issues.
The Minister's office is well aware, as the Minister, that we are ready to engage at any time.
Yeah, the same response, Mr. Shoebridge, trying to reach out to no avail.
Can I ask, when you saw that initial announcement for the return to school on the 16th of August, I know that you had multiple concerns, and I've seen the correspondence that you sent, Mr. Gavriladis, and I've seen your reported concerns, Mr. Northam. How soon after that announcement did you communicate those concerns to the department, and when did you start talking?
On the 27th of July, it was a Tuesday evening. As I've already said, we learnt of this through the media. I think it was a tweet by journalist Chris O'Keefe at 6:30-ish, or between that time and 7. Thereafter, there was a story in the Sydney Morning Herald. Almost immediately thereafter, I made contact with the Minister by message saying surely our views would be sought. And then after that, I was contacted at about 8:30-ish by the Secretary of the Department to advise me of what was already in the Sydney Morning Herald.
The Shoebridge, we've probably in a weaker position as far as consultation at that level goes. There's been no strong history of it and no reaching out on this occasion to us to seek our views. And I reiterate the reality that we have a multitude of employers, not just one, which probably doesn't assist that process.
And Mr. Shoebridge, just in case I didn't answer part of your question, from that moment, we communicated most directly our views in relation to that announcement or that decision by the Premier, which was thereafter announced publicly at the 11 o'clock press conference the following day. And I think there's plenty on record with respect to our views about that.
Indeed. Mr. Northam, the public health advice that's been provided to the department about the return, about any return to schools in the Greater Sydney area, has that also been uniformly provided to all of the teachers that you represent and the school systems that you represent?
Look, I understand I can answer that in the affirmative. The three sectors appear to be working quite reasonably well together at that peak level. I think the breakdown from this union's perspective is that we've never been invited to an employer briefing of any sort. And there's two major systems. There's Catholic Schools New South Wales, obviously, and the Association of Independent Schools, who would have the capacity to do that. But you know, I guess they elect or choose not to do that.
Do either of you have any understanding about what the proportion of HSC students you expect to be returning from the 16th of August in the Greater Sydney region, given the extremely tight restrictions in the public health orders? Are we talking 1%, 2%, 10% of HSC students? Do you know, have you got any understanding of what that's likely to be?
Well, we can't put a figure on that, Mr. Shoebridge, although what our reference point is the very clear advice, both in letter and in spirit and intent, with respect to what is to happen from next Monday, the 16th. The advice is very clear, where it says that where schools choose to run trial HSC exams, noting that they're not mandatory, but they are practiced in many schools across all of Greater Sydney area, they are to be conducted remotely. That is clear. It thereafter says that with respect to students who live and or study in the tighter lockdown LGAs, if I can express it in those terms, the 8 plus those others, they are not to return to school. And thereafter, for the rest of the Greater Sydney area, it is very clear, the language which says that it's only for essential reasons that go to essential reasons for curriculum and well-being. And if it is deemed essential, that it would be under very strict conditions, including the fact that students would attend individually or in small groups. We would anticipate, and given the numbers, given the continuing cases, they're rising the cases, we would anticipate that the numbers would be very, very low, remembering that Dr. Kerry Chant has made it very clear repeatedly that one of the ways that are critical to reducing the spread is to reduce mobility. You can only reduce mobility by ensuring that that travel is kept to an absolute minimum. That's another reason why the announcement of 12 days ago was, was beyond comprehension, because it would have seen literally 50,000 plus students from across Greater Sydney area crisscrossing suburbs, let alone the thousands of teachers at the same time.
Mr. Northam, did you want to add anything, or did that cover it?
No, look, I think that covers it. It was that mass mingling of students that certainly caused our members, and particularly the principal school leaders, to seek union assistance on a scale not known to us previously.
Could I ask you both to comment on if the government was to reach out and offer a prioritised vaccination program for teachers, would you be willing to sit down with the government and talk about ensuring that the government, that the schools then got the numbers and the data about vaccinations so as they could assess the public health risks as part of a return to school? Because obviously, the proportion of students, the proportion of teachers that are vaccinated would be relevant to the decision-making about a return to school.
Noting that with respect to any vaccination program, individuals should always seek the advice of their GPs. Noting that, were the government to announce a vaccination program, a prioritisation of such for teachers, we would actively promote and encourage the highest possible take-up rate of the teaching service.
And Mr. Shoebridge, our sector would echo those sentiments. Our members are saying to us uniformly, please get us in the vaccination queue, and then we can get back into work, and we understand the significance of schools and the service they provide to their community. It would be a huge step forward It started in a small way in Sydney, in those 3 areas, and it needs to spread out in a medically approved sequential manner as quickly as possible.
Now, I think we've had a fair amount of commentary on the somewhat chaotic proposal for the 16th of August. But do both of you think that there is a credible pathway to get the vaccination levels right, to get the safe systems in place at schools and in examination centres, so as we can see the HSC, the exams start in mid to late October? Are you hopeful that done well, done cooperatively, done with advanced planning can happen?
Well, we would certainly hope that would be the case. I think, like every member of the general public, we want to see the back of this as quickly as possible. We want to see a return to normal, whatever, or a greater normal, as soon as possible. None of this will be without its challenges, but all I can say to this committee and this inquiry is that on our part, the goodwill is there to sit down and work through all these complexities in the interest of looking after the educational and emotional well-being of all students. All students and their well-being is of concern to us. But there's no doubt our Year 12 students have always had a special place. We've invested 13 years in them. They were impacted last year and again this year. We want the very best for them and their parents who lived vicariously through their children resitting the HSC. So this will not be without its challenge, but it's certainly, there is goodwill on our part. But at the end of the day, Mr. Shoebridge, we have to act on the health advice before us, because that's what we've done right from the beginning.
Mr. Shoebridge, the health advice, as Mr. Gavlos just mentioned, is critical. It's the key. But I think if the government stepped into this space in a consultative mode, and that was the way, the prism that they looked through the matter, you hopefully could get that HSC underway. There's a period of time there, the window's there, if it all falls into place. And I think it is achievable, subject to COVID getting worse, etc. But if you had a cogent plan, this union would step up and do everything within its power to ensure that it worked.
It comes down to case numbers, Mr. Shoebridge, case numbers, vaccination rates, all those objective metrics which no doubt would inform, or we trust would inform, the health advice. And as I said, we've always acted in a manner that's consistent with the health advice that's available to us.
And of course, developing a COVID safety regime with the people who know the most about how your schools operate. And that would involve your members, I would expect.
Yeah, you'd consider that, you'd think that was a pretty obvious proposition, wouldn't you?
I'll pass over back to the opposition now.
Great, thank you, Chair. I might just pick up on that question about students moving around the city. I agree the guidelines are clear. I don't think it's surprising that either of you are unable to predict the number of students who might be moving around under these new guidelines. I did think it was concerning that the department doesn't seem to have an idea about how many students move around. Clearly, it's the key concern of the Chief Health Officer. She was clear about that yesterday. Dr. Chan, in giving evidence, said she wouldn't approve anything which was boosting mobility significantly. Is it of concern to you that the department doesn't seem to know how many of those students might be moving around? And is this something that we need to watch very closely next week as these new guidelines come into place? So,
Mr. Graham, the question obviously relates to the Greater Sydney area and those areas outside the 8+ LGAs. I don't believe, just got to be careful here. I was going to be saying that in defence of the Department of Education, Mr. Graham, I don't think well, we certainly don't expect them to have such numbers at this point in time. But we certainly expect, as is the practice, for those numbers to be very closely and carefully monitored, such that if there are any suggestions of levels of attendance that of concern, that we're able to work together to put in place the necessary communication strategy to reinforce the importance of people staying at home. So it's very hard to get ahead of this, but the department has shown previously throughout the pandemic that there is a close monitoring of numbers to allow us for appropriate interventions to remedy situations as best we possibly can.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Northam, did you want to add anything to that?
Look, not on that one, because we don't have the same structure.
No, that's fine. Can I just ask both of you to reflect, Mr. Gavrielatos and Mr. Northam? The Labor opposition has tried to take a constructive and bipartisan approach during this pandemic. Would you support one of the things we have been calling for is the release of the health advice as the basis for that government decisions are being taken? Would you support calls for the health advice to be released that was the basis of the decision to try and the ill-fated return on the 28th of July, that announcement? If we called for the health advice to be specifically released for that decision, would you support that call?
We would support a call for all the health advice to be released. Yeah, because in this pandemic, our view is that one of the most important things to grow and deepen trust is transparency. And consistent with that would be the release of health advice laid bare for all to see. As I said, one of the big concerns for us, and Mr. Northam also reflected on this, is what appears at time to time to be incredibly contradictory messages. Dr. Chance said that the greatest contributor to transmission and infection are work sites and human interaction. Yet we were told to return 600 people to a work site called a school, where the key business was human interaction. Releasing that health advice, such transparency, would go a long way to build trust and confidence.
Thanks for your question again, Ms. Houssos. Look, I think what you described, that the notion of a constructive and bipartisan approach to this is possibly the way forward, because what you've described there has been the missing element all along, and that's when our switchboard lights up. Why would they take that decision? How was it taken? Why was it taken? Do they understand what a school environment is? That's where our members' heads were and still are. So I think what you've hit upon is the missing element. And if people could access that advice, we'd echo the call for all of the advice, but that one in particular, I think would shed some really interesting light on how things unfolded so quickly and in such a negative way.
Thanks very much. I think our time has expired, so I'll hand back to the chair.
Thanks, Courtney. Look, my final question is this, and it may be impossible to answer briefly, but your members must have been reporting back to you about the reality of the digital divide, those students who are able to connect and do online learning and those who can't. Do you have any observations about how that's playing out? And particularly as we're likely to see weeks or months more of lockdowns?
Mr. Shoebridge and members of the Legislative Council, we often read reports that reference online learning. It's not a term that we use in education, because we don't do online learning. We do something that's called remote teaching and learning and various other forms. One of the reasons we don't do online learning is because we've never trained to be online learning deliverers, but we also recognise that there are many assumptions made with the reference to online learning. Assumption that students have access to multiple devices, assumption that students have space in their home for this remote teaching and learning. Regrettably, that's not the case, and that's not the lived experience of many students, some of whom don't even have a desk to work at in their homes. Whilst many students have access to multiple devices and various platforms, a lot don't. And there are efforts, of course, to extend technologies to many students, and I heard earlier today references to dongles and the like. Fact is, it's not the lived experience of many. And that's why we see in so many locations across New South Wales, and it's probably happening right now, this minute of the day, photocopying reams of paper, stuffing envelopes, getting ready to dispatch those envelopes either through the post or delivering it to the community centre down the road, or driving cars around streets, delivering material for our kids. That's the commitment of our teachers and our principals, who'll continue to do that to provide some level of educational continuity for students for as long as this pandemic requires this social distancing.
Mr. Shoebridge, those equity issues exist in the Catholic and independent sector, as you could well imagine, and we've certainly taken calls as recently as today with HSC trials potentially online. How do you bridge those equity issues where students just simply do not have access to the technology to help them do, say, a timed online task and submit it across a particular platform? So it is a very real issue for many students, and I'm not sure of the answer to it, because the notion that you can get devices into so many students' hands would be such an enormous task. But it's certainly not the preferred way of delivering education. But at this point, it's the best. But I've also noticed that that drive-through notion of picking up your school work in the weekly batch is evident in the Catholic sector as well.
Well, unfortunately, time has beaten us. I'd like to thank you both for your work, the work of your members, and also your contribution to the committee's deliberations today. You may or may not have noticed there's been a shadow of online learning passing back and forth across my camera as the day has progressed. I think we're all feeling the stresses and the reality of online learning, learning from home, learning remotely, as we'll say, Mr. Gavriladis. But it is a particular burden on the teaching profession, and I know that my own letterbox has received some of those parcels from teachers who have just gone above and beyond to keep students connected. So thank you all for your work. And with that, I'll note that will conclude today's hearing. I'd like to thank the committee members and all of the witnesses today. I do want to appreciate the constructive way in which all members of this committee, crossbench, government and opposition, have cooperated. I think it's been very worthwhile, and I'm grateful for this cooperation. So that will conclude today's broadcast.
Thanks, Mr. Shoebridge. Thank you.